All right, I'm going to talk about web workers. I know some of you guys are using web workers already in your projects. Is it just the DDR team? Is anybody else using web workers? No? Okay. Well, hopefully you guys can learn something from this. All right, so what is a web worker? A web worker is a way to multi-thread in JavaScript. That might sound like blasphemy to some of you, multi-threading in JavaScript, but you have experience with this, kind of. So the way multi-threading works is you have kind of one instance of JavaScript running, another instance of JavaScript running, and they communicate with each other via events. So this might sound familiar, this pattern. You guys have worked with it with sockets. It's kind of like using sockets. Web workers were introduced with HTML5, and they're supported by most modern browsers, including mobile browsers. Even Internet Explorer has it, so you know it's legit by now. So this is the Chrome console. If you just go to your Chrome console and log worker, you'll see the worker constructor function right there, ready. It's ready to get to work. So why would you want a multi-thread? There's two good reasons that I've found. Before we get into them, I want to talk about this code a little bit. So don't let that search thing distract you, by the way. That's a label. That's a way of breaking or continuing from nested loops to break or continue the outside loop. What would happen if we ran this normally in the browser, just looking at the loop condition? Anyone? Justin? It would be real weird, right? So the user interface would freeze. Everything would freeze, and eventually the browser would realize that JavaScript has been running too long, and it'll say a script has been running too long, and everything will stop. But there's nothing inherently wrong with a while true loop. The JavaScript is still running. You just can't see it because the user interface is locked. In JavaScript, the UI and the JavaScript thread both run in the same thread. So they take turns, kind of. The call stack needs to be free for the UI to update. Right? So when you have JavaScript running too long, the UI cannot update, and it'll be frozen during that time. So if you have a while true loop, this whole thing would just be JavaScript. The UI would never update. So what's the solution to this? Workers, right. So it looks something like this. I made this. I'm proud. This is the while true loop here running forever, and the UI can update, and everything is fine. So going back here, this would be in a worker file somewhere, and the main thread would update the DOM for you. I'll get into that later. But here's a demo of this working. OK, so that's a while true loop running through and finding prime numbers, and it's sending back to the main thread what the highest prime number it's found is. So this will just run forever. It's kind of fun to watch. So that's the first use case for web workers generally, freeing the UI thread. The second use case is for something like this. This is supposed to be an image processing, OK? It's processing slowly. So it'll make more sense when you've seen this. OK, so this is another demo where I can render an image. It's like doing some really heavy processing on this image. And I can tell it how many workers to use when doing that, and it'll tell me how long it took. So this is with no workers. It took 1.5 seconds. I'm going to refresh the page so it doesn't cache. With one worker, 0.3 seconds. With two, 0.2. There's a point to this. Don't worry, I won't do this for all of them. A little bit less than 0.2. And with 4, it's about the same. And I'm just going to jump to 16 now. So you can see that I'm not getting, it actually went up. So there's kind of diminishing returns. And that's because the way that multi-threading speeds things up is by using multi-core technology. And this computer has 4 cores. So you can see that really clearly with this demo. Here's a list of some things that you might use web workers for. I'm not going to go through all of them. But what are you guys on the DDR team using web workers for? I think it's something UI related, right? It's not,
Yeah.
right.
We don't want the JavaScript to lag our animation while it's going.
Right, so it's something UI related. I figured the video team might be interested in web workers at some point because there's probably a lot of processing there. So there's two different types of web workers. There's a normal web worker, a dedicated worker, and there's a shared worker. And I'm going to be talking about dedicated workers because they're a little bit easier and you can do pretty much everything with them. And the constructor function is just worker for them. Shared workers are a bit more complicated, but they're also stronger. They can communicate with any other script just about, and they can do things like communicate across tabs or windows in your browser. This is a dedicated worker, really basic setup. So this is just a complicated way of logging worker said hello world. All right, so I'm gonna try to walk through this. So you start by making the worker up there. In the worker constructor, that parameter is a file. So it's making an AJAX request to get that. It's getting worker.js, and then it's starting that up by itself. And then that is going to add an event listener. You listen on message. There's only one event you can send, which is message. So that event listener is going to post back to the main thread exactly what it was sent, which is edata, which is hello world in this case. So I'm going to post message, which sends a message event. It's going to post that data back, and this listener is going to listen for that and log hello world, basically. There's some do's and do nots. I need another bullet point, so I put this one here. Communicate with workers via messages. That's just how they work. So workers will run forever unless you terminate them. So just keep that in mind and reuse them whenever you can, so you don't have to keep making them. Don't block the UI thread. Talked about that. Workers are really not very performant. They take a lot of memory, so you don't want to just make 1 million of them. It will not work. I'll show you why. And do not pass large data back and forth. It won't like that. So here's a demonstration of why not to make 1 million of them. This is my stackathon. Whenever I make a friend, it's making a new worker thread. There's my friend. I'm going to make about 20 friends real quick. Basically what I did at full stack. OK, so you can see there's 37 threads here, and it's using 2 gigabytes of memory, which is a lot of RAM. Just to prove that this is actually happening, 37, I'll make 3 more. 1, 2, 3. And that'll take a second. But it should, OK. Apparently I made 2. I made some kind of error clicking. Back to my slides. In the worker context, it has access to different things than your main thread. This is a list of all of them. The biggest being that it cannot update the DOM. So if you want to update the DOM, you need to send information back to the main thread, and then the main thread handler will update the DOM for you. And these are some resources. I don't recommend looking at these, by the way. There's not that much information about web workers out there. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to find information. Any questions? Yes?
So when you initialize that worker, you gave it a script inside as a parameter. Is that like in your code? Would that be like a hyperlink to an external script? Is that how that would work?
Not a. Think of it the same as like when you're doing a source for like an image. It's just like that. It's exactly the same. I saw Kim first.
Whenever you make multiple workers for the same thing, when you said workers use a message, do you have to set how each of the individual workers are?
I think you would have to register a listener for each worker, yeah. Is that what you're saying?
Each one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a way to know how many processors the computer has so you know how many to use?
I don't think so. Maybe, but that sounds complicated. I wouldn't recommend it. Any other questions? Thank you.